Information fueled,
opinion driven. This is Nashville's Morning News with Dan Mandis.
And so, my fellow Americans,
we talk news.
8:07, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Welcome on in for a Monday, November 18th, along with Johnny B, Joe and Jones. I am Dan Mandis indeed, and State Senate Majority Leader Jack Johnson is joining us on the Newsmaker Hotline. I'm always appreciative of your time, Senator, and let's just get right down to business. There's a number of stories that I find fascinating. First of all, this headline, and I was a little surprised by it, but you can help me fill in the details. Doctors say the suspect in the Jillian Ludwig case not competent to stand trial. This guy, this is the one, just for folks that remember, he's the one that killed Jillian Ludwig. And initially, they did not have him stand trial way back in 2021 because he had fired a gun into a car that carried a 1 and a 3-year-old. He was deemed incompetent. They let him back out, and then he got himself a gun again, fired it, and killed Jillian Ludwig. And so the big question was, how is a guy who was found mentally incompetent over and over again, how is he back out onto the street and then he gets a gun and he kills someone? In the state legislature, you folks did pass Jillian's Law, which I think is great. But I guess the question is, okay, so now we have yet another headline that says that he is not competent to stand trial. I would, by the way, argue tooth and nail that he is competent to stand trial, but I don't want to get into that with you. But does Jillian's Law not apply to Shaquille Taylor at this point? And I mean, help me fill in the blanks here.
Hey, Dan, good morning. Always good to be with you. Thanks for having me on. Yes, we passed Jillian's Law back during this past legislative session. That situation with Jillian Ludwig is a horrific example of nonsensical violence that took place on the Belmont campus. And you had this individual who had committed violent crimes previously and had been deemed incompetent to stand trial. And with some judges and in some courtrooms, and there was some disagreement on this, some judges interpreted that if an individual was deemed incompetent to stand trial, that you just had to dismiss the case and just turn them loose back onto the streets. Now, there were other judges who would fight strenuously to have those people involuntarily committed for mental health treatment. So we passed Jillian's Law to say, no, without question, if an individual is charged with a violent crime, the courts then will remand that individual involuntarily, if necessary, for mental health treatment. You shouldn't just be turning them back out onto the streets so that they can commit additional crimes. Now, in terms of the application for this particular individual, I don't know. That's something the courts will have to interpret relative to ex post facto issues and the fact that the crime was committed before this law was passed. But fundamentally, it's important for people to know that now when someone is deemed incompetent to stand trial, they will be remanded for mental health treatment until they are determined to be competent to stand trial, and then you can proceed with the trial, or they're ultimately deemed not to be a threat to society.
All right, other news, because I know your time is short, so is mine. I think this is interesting. State Representative Todd Warner, Republican out of Chapel Hill, he is drawing up legislation, or he has legislation, where he wants to deport illegal aliens to the nearest sanctuary city of their choosing, but out of the state of Tennessee. Now, it's important for folks to know this is not, people that come in and commit other violent crimes. No, this is somebody who is in our country and in our state illegally. And there's a lot here. So let me just explain it to folks. I don't know if you've heard of this bill or not. You're, of course, in the state Senate. But here's what did they say. They say the Tennessee Illegal Immigration Act, the bill is calling on law enforcement agencies in the state to request an immigration detainer from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, when a person in custody is found to be in the country illegally. Once the detainer is received, the law enforcement agency will hold the individual for the maximum time requested by the detainer or until ICE takes custody of the person. If that detainer expires or one is not received by law enforcement, or if that person is not taken into federal custody, then they would be transported out of the state to a sanctuary city. In this case, it would be a location outside of Tennessee, and within 700 miles of where that person has been taken into custody. I love this part. This is my favorite part. And by the way, I'm all for this, not to lead the witness, but I love this part. Tennessee will then send the costs to the U.S. Treasury Department. If we don't get reimbursed, then we will withhold payment on federal taxes on fuel equal to those expenses. Now, there's a lot of detail in that, and I'm sure a lot of people got lost in the detail. But, you know, from a general standpoint, Jack Johnson, what do you think?
Well, I love it as well. I think it's a great idea. But let's break down what's supposed to happen and what is not happening now, and why we're so frustrated with the Biden administration and their failure whenever it comes to enforcing our immigration laws. What's supposed to happen if law enforcement encounters someone because they've committed a crime or for whatever reason law enforcement comes into contact with someone, they have to take them into custody because they've assaulted someone or they've been caught vandalizing or burglarizing or they've committed murder, whatever the case might be. And then they determine that individual is in the country illegally. Well, first of all, they should be prosecuted and they should face the appropriate punishment for their crime. Once that has been done, then the way the process is supposed to work is that we notify ICE. We believe this individual is in the country illegally, and Immigration Customs Enforcement comes and gets that individual and takes them to the border and deports them and gets them out of the country. And then, of course, they're identified, they're fingerprinted, and if you have a secure border, when people are wanting to come legally into the country, you're able to identify who that person is, and they're not allowed to come back into the country. It's why it is so incredibly important, and we're all so excited that Donald Trump was reelected president. He's appointed Tom Homan to be his border czar, and now we're going to have a cooperative federal government and Immigration and Customs Enforcement agency that is going to help us deal with these people who are in the country illegally, and for those who are in Tennessee, we're going to get them out of the state.
I know that it's a little hard to get a hold of Governor Lee these days, but from your vantage point, you do have a lot of these governors in other states that are saying, well, we are going to Trump-proof their state. I'm assuming by your comments there that everyone is on the same page, from the governor's office to the state legislature, for the most part, that everyone is on board with cooperating with a mass deportation?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. And let me remind you and your listeners, Dan, we've done an incredible amount of work to demagnetize Tennessee, because when you have a failed immigration system and you have an unsecure border, which we've had for the last 4 years, really the only time we've had a secure border was during the 4 years that Trump was president previously, and that's why we're so excited he's going to be back in the White House and get that border secure again. But not only are we going to cooperate, we passed a law several years ago that prohibited any city, any municipality in the state of Tennessee from designating themselves to be a sanctuary city, meaning that they will not cooperate with federal immigration authorities. So that's been prohibited for many years in Tennessee. The problem is we haven't had a federal government and a federal immigration enforcement system that was following the law. We're going to have that under Donald Trump. We're going to have that under border czar Tom Homan, and I could not be more excited.
Majority Leader Jack Johnson, state senator, is joining us on the Newsmaker Hotline. So this is a big deal because SB 1, of course, the state's ban on transgender surgeries for minors, that is going to go in front of the Supreme Court on December 4th. Everyone knows that, most people listening to WTN are against these transgender surgeries on minors. Again, this is SB 1. We talked about this a lot. How do you think this is going to fare in front of the Supreme Court? Because our case, Tennessee's case, is, I guess, the test case for the entire nation.
It is, Dan. I'm very excited about this. You're right. In 2023, House Majority Leader William Lamberth and I sponsored this legislation to ban these surgeries, transgender reassignment surgeries on minors, as well as the use of these very, very harmful prescription drugs, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones. We banned all of that in Tennessee. Not unexpected. We were sued. We were sued by the Biden Department of Justice and the ACLU over that legislation. It's made its way through the court system. Now, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed our law. It is in place right now. Children are protected in Tennessee right now. But in other states, other jurisdictions, similar laws or variations of the law have been enjoined. And so you've got different decisions from appellate courts, which means that potentially the Supreme Court can take the issue up and decide it once and for all. And that's what is happening. The United States Supreme Court granted cert on this case back a few months ago, and we found out a couple of weeks ago that oral arguments will be December 4th. And our law that we passed in Tennessee, along along with Kentucky's law, but ours is really the lead on that, will be the test case for the entire country. It's very exciting, somewhat overwhelming and a bit humbling, but I will be in Washington with a number of my colleagues on December 4th. Ask your audience to pray for a good outcome there before the Supreme Court. Probably won't get a decision until sometime next year, but these oral arguments will take place on December 4th at 10 a.m., United States Supreme Court, and we're very, very excited that Tennessee is again leading the nation and setting the standard for protecting kids from these very, very harmful surgeries and drugs.
All right, we've got like 60 seconds left. Other priorities real quick in the state legislature.
Well, I'm very optimistic. We're going to get universal school choice passed. I'm committed to that. Governor Lee and the vast majority of our colleagues are supportive of that. Parents should be able to make educational decisions that are best for their kids. The government should not decide where your kid goes to school. You should decide where your child goes to school. So we're going to create a universal voucher program. We call them education freedom scholarships for kids, so parents can make educational decisions that are best for their kids. More to come on that, but very excited. And that, by the way, Dan, is Senate Bill 1 and House Bill 1 for the 114th General Assembly, the very first bill filed.
All right. Thank you very much. Always appreciate your time. State Senator Majority Leader Jack Johnson.